Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Are there any answers there?
No, they're classes.
We're going to talk today about, it's a little bit different. It's going to be all about various interesting sub-languages and text formats that you'll come across in your travels through being a software engineer. And I'm confronted with one of the challenges always, which is when students are working on a project, anything that's not directly applicable to the project, they have a hard time thinking about it. But I'm trying to not be just a project-based thing, but teach you stuff that's a little broader. So you maybe get a little impatient, like why is he talking about XML? We don't need it for our product. Well, you will need it as a software engineer for sure. The other thing I wanted to mention was the 3-day startup event that's happening in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it is. Pardon?
We pitch our own products.
Yes, but you gotta get your name on the list. Absolutely, anybody who wants to be part of 3-day startup, the way it works is that you put your name in, and as long as you can commit to those 3 days, that's the only filter they really have, and it's a Friday, Saturday, and a Sunday. You will have a chance. It starts off with everybody in a big room, and people pitch their products and try to form teams around products that are interesting, okay? And then you'll have basically a team of, let's say, 4, 5, 6 students, half of them business students, half of them not, to really spend 3 days doing market validation and prototyping and all this stuff on the product. It's really fun, and I recommend it. I believe they're still taking applications because I think in fact, I know they are. So I suggest I'm going to be a mentor there. Various people are going to be mentors there. There'll be food, there'll be soda, blah, blah, blah. Yes?
So business people will also come to
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, there'll be more business people than computer people.
Oh, there's also a business thing tonight from the side.
I'm sorry?
There's a thing for you tonight.
That's something totally different. That's just a networking event. 3-day startup is you're building the product.
So if they like your product, they will enjoy it.
Yeah, basically, yeah. I don't know exactly how it works, but yeah, if you come with 3 people that all want to work on the product, then you can work on it together. It's pretty loose, but the idea is that they take you through a pretty structured process, and they have people to help you, and they give you space, and they give you a lot of encouragement, and it's a lot of fun. So I recommend anybody who wants to try that to give it a shot. Okay? All right. So today I'm going to talk about a whole bunch of different things. I'm going to go fast through it. I have no idea yet whether I'm going to run out of time or have time left over, but we'll see how it goes. But basically, you will encounter it already, and you will encounter it more in the future, a whole bunch of these little sub-languages. You know, like you've seen ERB, you've seen HTML, you've seen CSS, you haven't seen JSON yet, you haven't seen YAML, and you may or may not have seen JSON or YAML, you haven't seen XML. But one of the big challenges developing software in this world of web-based applications is that there's not just one language, there's like a dozen languages. And if you look at any website that is built nowadays, you'll guaranteed to have to know a language like Ruby or Java or Python. You'll have to know a framework like, you know, Rails or something else. You'll have to know CSS. You'll have to know JavaScript. You'll have to know HTML, and you'll probably need to know a few more things. So most of them are just like mini programming languages. In fact, I even think of HTML as a mini programming language. It's not a programming language that's executes statement by statement. It's more of a declarative language, but it is a language that has a syntax, and when you execute it, something happens. And in the case of HTML, when you execute it, what happens? Yeah, it renders it in the browser, right? Yeah, it renders it somewhere. In fact, it doesn't always render it in the browser. The one example that might be interesting is, yes?
I think if you do Selenium or
Yes.
what was the other
Capybara.
one?
That's exactly the example.
That does not actually render it visually,
Yeah.
but semantically. So the app knows that there's text and there are buttons.
Right.
Like conceptually. And if you have the statement press this button, then it executes the method behind the button without ever having drawn the button.
Exactly right. So that's a case where HTML actually is being executed and parsed and validated, and something happens. In fact, when we think about HTML, just as a side, there's a very fundamental concept called the document object model, or the DOM. Okay, the DOM, oops, I'm going to turn on my caffeine here. The DOM is a data structure that is formed as a result of parsing a bunch of HTML. And it's a data structure that reflects the hierarchy of all the objects on the screen. And in fact, it's the data structure that something like Selenium or Capybara uses to understand what's on the page.
Are you recording?
Pardon me?
Are you recording?
I am recording, yes. I hope. I think I am. Yes, I am. The annoying thing is when you're recording in full screen, there's no evidence. I have to just remember. Anyway, but the DOM puts names on all the elements in HTML, which are then the things on which you hook your CSS or you hook your JavaScript. Okay, so let's jump into, so that's the basic premise. So the basic premise is there's a language, there's a syntax, and when you execute it, it does something. So let's look at some of the most important ones. I'm going to start with XML. Now, who's seen XML before and who's worked with it? Okay, did you put your hand up?
Yeah.
Okay, tell us what XML is and what's interesting about it.
I used XML maybe 2 years ago, and I'm not 100% precise. I won't tell what I remember. So I think it's like tree structure. Like you have a root, and each root are node. You use the labels to denote the nodes of the information, and the information are stored in the nodes, and it's surrounded by open label and closed label.
Exactly right. Yeah. Anybody want? Yeah, Burke.
I remember it more like graph structure and then tree structure.
Yeah.
Like, you could go like, not like the roots, but like.
No, it is a tree structure. It is. There's ways of I think putting pointers to other elements. But fundamentally, it's a tree structure. Was that a hand, John? No. Yeah. So the thing about here's I'm gonna make it a little bigger. The thing about XML is it's totally abstract. It's very, very simple, very easy to understand, and it does nothing. Okay, what it does is it gives you a standardized text format to represent complicated structured data. For example, if I wanted to email you, if there was something like, let's take an invoice, right? An invoice has who it's for, how much money it is, what's being bought, what the part numbers and so on and so forth are. If I wanted to represent that invoice in a way that is that explains what every piece of information on it means, and there's a bunch of ways to do it. If I was going to send you an email, I could write it in English. I could say the price was this, the number of items was that, the product name was this. XML addressed the problem of taking structured information like that and coming up with a universal, very abstract way of describing it. Okay, and the purpose is for interoperation between different systems. Okay, so if you look at this very simple example, I'll ignore the first line for a second, and it looks just like HTML, and that's because HTML is a variant of XML. Okay, there's a couple of concepts. There's a tag, which is something in angle brackets, and there's nesting, open tag and close tag, open tag, close tag, and there's a few more variations. But that's really all there is to it. And there's a notion of an XML file being syntactically correct or incorrect. Right? So you can, if I left off the close tag, it would be incorrect. There is, at this stage, of what I've shown you so far, no notion of a schema that says what is legal. There's nothing that says whether it's okay or not to put another tag in here that says age. Age begin, age end. That would be a schema that said for everything called student, I require it to have a name, a gender, and an age. But XML by itself doesn't have that. There's a few other related standards. I think it's called XMLS. But by and large, the basic idea for XML is just that, angle brackets, open and close tag, and so on. Now, it's a really important system. I want to just show you a project I worked on a little while ago, which was an open source system for running elections. And the information that was produced by a scanner that scanned ballots was in XML format. And the reason was that this would be transmitted on either over the internet or on a memory stick or in an attached file, although forget about security issues for a second, to a system written by somebody else in a different language and everything, and somehow you had to reliably convey the results of this. So here's an example of of a little bit of XML. Okay, this is real stuff. And if you imagine that I'm trying to send you, you can't even read it. It says your contest name, Fire Protection District 5, Fire Commissioner, position number 2, ID is 6, display order 46. Name of the person is Tommy Taylor, his display in position 1, his type CD, whatever. This is a description of the valve. If you imagine, pardon?
Is this in Boston?
I don't remember anymore where it was from. This was just one of many, many files I had. I wanted to show you real world use of XML. This file goes on and on and on and on. And this file, I mean, if you were told, give me a way to represent all this information about what goes on a ballot in a way that I can send it to you in a different country and you program in a different language so you can process it, what would you use? You might use a CSV, a comma delimited file, but that would be way too weak. You might use a text file with a lot of labels, but that would be unreliable because what about punctuation? What about non-Latin characters? The natural thing to use in this scenario is XML because XML is built for this. Okay? Now, and this is sitting in Git if you want to look at it. It's not, other than being an interesting example, it's not that interesting. There's a really good program which I forgot to download to show you, but I'll recommend it to you if you want to work with XML. I use this called Exemplify. It's a really good XML editor. And basically it parses an XML file and lets you work on it, tells you if it's valid and so forth. There is hardware that's designed to process XML because if you imagine that I have a system that's generating, for example, every time somebody clicks on a link in Amazon generating a record of data and then sending it off somewhere else for processing, there's actually hardware that's built to process XML very, very fast. So it's a really important format. The other thing that XML does that other languages I'll talk about does not do as well is deal with various character sets. And that was what this notation here is about. And I won't get into it. It's a whole long, very, very complicated story. But basically, if my name included some Chinese characters or included some Arabic characters, obviously I can't use ASCII. I can't use 8-bit ASCII to represent this. So I have to deal with other character sets. I have to be able to represent them correctly and have it go from my Mac in Boston to somebody's God knows what, IBM mainframe in Japan, and have it all come out correctly. Yes?
What if your name had angle brackets or something in it?
Yeah.
If it was like a username or something.
Yeah, there's ways of escape. They call that escaping. So yeah, but that's the easy case of what happened if my name had a Chinese character, because there's no way. I mean, I don't even know what Sublime Text would do with that. It may or may not work. I have no idea. But when you talk about a format that's specifically designed for interoperability between systems, handling non-Latin character sets is a really important thing. Okay, so characteristics. Okay, so there's I don't even know why I said go to Google here. I don't remember anymore why I said this, so forget that. I don't remember. Okay, but anyway, you'll see this later that there are attributes embedded in addition to the angle brackets. We'll get to that in a second. Okay, so let's come up with some examples. Make up an example of when you think XML might be useful. Just invent something. Yeah?
I'm pretty sure they did it with JBS for some of the mobile apps.
Yeah.
They were using XML and Eclipse to build their UI.
Yeah, that's true.
It was a team, they were making some video game.
Yeah, no, you have to, and to do it.
Asteroids.
Pardon?
That's Android standard.
Yeah, and to build an app with Android, you have to use XML.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe some API calls like to Google Translate, and then you
Yeah.
get back an XML.
Yeah, for example,
Google
let's
Map
say,
or something.
pardon?
Or Google Map API call, and then you get all the
Right.
back and XML.
Right, exactly. So let's say you ask Google Map to say, what are the stores, what are the restaurants in this town, which you can ask it, and it'll give you a picture with a map with the pictures of the restaurants. But if you had an API where you want to grab that programmatically, what would it return to you? It could return to you, well, what are the options other than XML?
JSON.
Huh?
JSON.
JSON, we'll get to that in a second. Yes, that's an option, exactly right. But I mean, the point is when you have a lot of structured data and you want to transmit it to an unknown recipient, you need some way to annotate the data with what it is. We call that self-describing. So it's a self-describing structure. And if you don't have, I mean, who knows what CSV is? Common delimited text, CSV, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So how have you seen CSV used?
Usually they're kind of like, if you like export like Excel
Right.
spreadsheet or something, a lot of them can be either tab separated or comma separated.
Yeah.
And I don't know, they usually follow a similar structure like XML where it's like every comma, it has a structure.
Right.
So if it's like name, comma, and then you have, you know, whatever the name is, and then you kind of follow that same pattern. It's just a different way of representing data. And there are different parsers that use that same way XML.
Right. And so in CSV you might say quote name, comma, quote phone,
Yeah.
new line, Tito Salas, and maybe not even a comma, space, 6171234, whatever. And this has a syntax. It's just much simpler. I mean, the syntax is that for every line of text, there's a series of quoted strings, and the result of it is a two-dimensional grid of values. Sometimes we give a little bit of semantics to the first row, and we say that the first row is a column name. But the point is, it's structured in a particular way, and in fact, in Ruby, there's very nice support for CSV as an aside. But if you had something more complicated, where you had nesting, like voting information or anything else, this would break down. And so then you get into things like XML. Now, somebody mentioned JSON, which is an alternative, which I'll talk about in a second. Okay, so that's XML, setting the stage. Now let's look at HTML. Of course, you've all used HTML, but I'm going to, and bear with me, some of you will find this extraordinarily boring, and some of you will be surprised by it. So I'm going to go through it fairly slowly. No, fairly fast, rather. So similarly to XML, there's a standard structure, just looks just like XML. The only difference is, first of all, is that there's a few important differences even at this level. First of all, there is a schema. There is a notion of what is valid and what is not valid. And for HTML, it starts out with the outermost tags being HTML/HTML, and then there's one section which is the head section, head and slash head, and another section that's the body. Okay. The other rule of thumb is that the stuff in the head does not end up rendering on the screen. The stuff in the body does end up rendering on the screen, so you often have declarative stuff or implications of CSS files or other kinds of declarative stuff, and the stuff that ends up on the screen itself on the web page is between body and slash body. Up here you have a doc type. Now, like all these standards, like XML and like HTML, and each of these things, unfortunately, because they're programming language, they have gone through many versions. And I believe the latest version of I could be wrong, but HTML5 is what everybody talks about. It's the latest. I'm not exactly sure that the standard has been fully adopted. I don't know whether you or not. Somebody should Google this while we're talking. I think still the last officially frozen standard for HTML is not 5 yet, but everybody's using 5. But the first line here is related to the first line in the XML file, except it's different for HTML, and it includes things like the version and the UTF encoding and things like that. Generally, you get this from some boilerplate, and you don't have to worry about it too much, but you might see HTML files that have something else here. But then we have the body. Now, there's a lot of semantics here. When I say semantics, I'm saying, in contrast to what I said about XML. In XML, I said it doesn't do anything, it's all abstract. It brings nothing to the table. All it brings to the table is nesting and naming, that's it. Okay? In HTML, there's a lot of semantics. Things mean something, okay? And there's hundreds of tags, and I have a bunch of links here where you can go find tags if you're looking for one. Some tags fall into favor, some tags fall out of favor, some tags do something you can do another way better. Some tags work in certain browsers and not others. I mean, it's a nightmare in a way, okay? But don't let that scare you, because there's a handful of tags that will get you a long, long way, okay? I'm going to go through them. And for those of you who think you know, I'm going to ask you some questions. So the first one is H1. The H1 tag does what? Hands. Yes, Sharad.
It's like the largest kind of header you can have in terms of like font size.
Yep, exactly. So it's a header. It's a header implying size and implying font and so on. Angle bracket A, href, blah, 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 slash A. What does that do? Yeah, Joe.
Directs you to another page.
Huh?
It's a
No, it
link to
doesn't.
the page.
Doesn't direct you.
It's a link.
Refine it.
It creates a link.
Creates a link, right, and the link with this URL. Okay? Notice here, different from H1, for the first time we have an attribute. We have A, here's the closing angle bracket for the A tag, and here's the closing A tag. So it's actually open A, close A, whatever text you want, open /A. You can put anything you want here, not just the word. You could put a picture, you could put anything you like. That whole thing becomes a hotspot. When you click on it, the effect of it is navigating. In HTTP terms, what does the browser do when I click on this link? What does the browser do when I click on this link in HTTP terms? Come on.
Request.
Huh?
Sends a GET request.
Yeah. It's funny, I'm not quite sure enough to put your hand up, but I have to. Yes, it does an HTTP GET, exactly. So the browser, the semantics of the A tag is create a hotspot on my page that says, here's a picture of me, and the whole thing is under an A tag. If the mouse goes here, the browser, which is a piece of code, opens an HTTP connection to that URL and does a GET request. Okay? P/P, what does that do? Somebody new, somebody who hasn't answered before. Yeah.
It's a paragraph.
Okay.
Of the default text.
Pardon?
It's usually just like the normal text.
Yes, exactly. Yep. How about UL and /UL? Somebody hasn't asked yet? Yes?
An ordered list.
A what?
An ordered list.
Yeah, UL is unordered,
Yeah.
and then OL is ordered, and each item in the list is an LI. Okay? It's an old hat, but it's amazing if you can get along. I mean, a few key ones I left out, I'm going to mention them. HTML and HTML, obviously, head and head, of course, and body and body. Okay, who could call out some? Oh yeah, I put it here. What other tags would you say are also very common? Yes.
IMG
IMG tag. Yes.
for images, displaying image.
Yep. Okay. One other one. Yes.
Table.
Table. Not that common anymore. Who can say whether table is common still, and or refute what I said? Miranda.
I've seen it.
Yeah. Is it common or uncommon? Is it recommended?
I'm not sure anymore.
Yeah.
Usually you just order lists.
He wants to refute you. Yes. Come back.
In web development, it's considered very poor form to use a table for anything other than a table.
Uh-huh.
It used to be the case that people would use tables just for general formatting of web pages.
Yes.
And that's considered poor form because of how tables are loaded.
Yes. Because of how table are?
Are loaded.
Oh, tell me
Because,
more about that. I'm not familiar
when a
with that.
table loads.
I thought you were going to say how table looks. How table
Oh,
looks.
no. Actually, the look is why some people still use it, and it's not recommended anymore. But tables, when they load all at once.
Uh-huh.
So if any cell in a table
Yeah.
is not loading, the full table will not load. And
Uh-huh.
it also slows it down, because if you use divs and spans,
Uh-huh.
they'll load individually as they're available, but
Mhm.
the table will wait until the whole thing is available. So it's
Okay.
slower.
Very good. What else is very common that I've left off?
Right.
Joe. Yep.
Break, BR,
Okay, what does that do?
create space in between your sections.
What is the closing tag for break? Because everything has an open tag and a close tag, right?
No,
Yeah.
it's just another break,
Should.
isn't it?
The
Pardon?
correct form is to put the slash in the tag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you can use just /br. You don't have to.
Same thing.
Like that? Or is it like this?
No.
At the end.
So this is a shorthand. I don't know if you can read this. This is a shorthand for BR. This is obviously also legal.
That's the way I've always done it.
Yeah, which is they're all equivalent. But programmers are notoriously lazy. They don't want to type any extra characters. So you can put the closing slash right in the BR by itself. Okay, so BR is another one. Yes. What's another very common one that I've left off? How about Steve? Nothing? Got nothing? Eddie? Common tag I've left off? No? Okay. Miranda!
Div tag.
Div. What does div do?
Just creates a block item.
Pardon?
It just separates it's a block.
Okay.
That's all it does.
Okay, and what about span? What does span do?
Same thing over here.
Right. These are very important. Use them a lot. Yes?
And you can do div style, includes stuff, but you can also, HTML allows you to create your own tag. You can tag anything like you can tag it with like dot. You can say it's a dot.
Yes. In other words, you can say this. That's what you mean?
Yeah. And
What does that do? Since you brought it up.
I think CSS has a way to understand.
But what does this do itself? What would this do by itself without CSS? Anybody know? I don't know.
It doesn't change anything in display, but if
It barks.
but if CSS like if CSS is something with dot,
Yeah.
like we don't call it like style dot, but like
Yeah. We'll get to that. Yeah.
it will like affect that
Mhm.
thing in between dots.
Yeah. So this is legal, and there are purposes to this, and I'll tell you about that in half a second. What?
Have a second. Good luck with that.
Okay, I'm gonna do it now. Because I wanted to sort of build up to it. I mean, there's a notion that Bootstrap totally violates, that was very, very in vogue, maybe still is, called semantic HTML. The principle and the purists say that the only stuff that should be in HTML is tags which say what the content means, as opposed to what it should look like. So for example, H1, it means this is a header. It doesn't say what it should look like. For example, table should say this is a table, not what it looks like. And furthermore, this same philosophy says that when you want to make something look a certain way, obviously you use CSS, and you shouldn't have CSS rules that speak in terms of, again, appearance. You shouldn't have a rule that says red. I'm going to talk about CSS rules in a second, or 12-point bold green, or something like that. You should have a CSS rule that says header. And then you can decide in one place what header should look like, and you don't mix the appearance of the desired appearance never appears in the HTML. You never have things like red and green in HTML, so if you want to change the color of a header, you don't suddenly have information in HTML that says big green bold, where actually you've changed it, it's actually small yellow and italic, because now you have a contradiction. So this idea of semantic HTML, meaning HTML that only reflects the meaning of something, is a big meme. People care about it. Along comes Bootstrap, which in my opinion totally violates that, because Bootstrap, those of you who've used it, is all about describing what something looks like. So the rules all have to do with the columns and whether it's well, in some places it's semantic, where, for example, it says warning versus error, that would be semantic. But the notion of separation of semantics in the HTML and appearance in the CSS is a meme, an idea that comes from making the code more maintainable. In fact, as a small side story, in general, some people argue that coding standards or ideas about how to do good object design and all these things have to do as much as anything with maintainability, with how easily can somebody else or myself in 6 months understand what was going on. And anything that's sort of the higher level virtue is making code that can be easily managed and maintained. And anything that gets in the way of that is a bad habit. And so you can use that principle and find a lot of things that are supposed to be good habits, and they sort of devolve to that. So, so the notion of semantic HTML is like that. Because while you may know for sure that this thing is a paragraph, your desire to show the paragraph in a certain font can change. And if the tagging in HTML said, you know, Times Roman 12 point, then suddenly you could have a contradiction. Yeah.
I'm not familiar with HTML. I wonder if the position or like the topographical relationship between things is in this way semantic or not.
It is. It is very much, and it's used a lot. In fact, that sort of takes me to where I was going to go to the dog tag. The dog tag. How about that? It is allowed, just like what Burke said, in HTML, to have tags that are meaningful to you but are not part of the HTML standard, as long as syntactically it's correct. I believe, by the way, this this ability is new to a later version of HTML, maybe even HTML5. And then you'll find that in certain contexts, people have defined and tried to make into standards new tags like topic or headline or sidebar. And some of them are in, sort of in proposed standards, and people will talk about them as we're going to follow this. Various, also having to do with accessibility, with ability to be able to access a certain HTML page through a reader for the blind, where it's trying to talk to you and telling you what the page says. There's tags for that too. So yes, you can put any random tag in you want. It's generally considered to be bad practice to do it at random, because you really should be doing it with CSS. However, there are certain collections of proposed new tags, essentially, where people are using new tags for things like, as I said, headline or sidebar or footnote or whatever. Okay, now, there are a million tags, as I said. Oh, see, there's one acronym, not supported in HTML5. There's a million of them. Don't let that bother you. Yeah. So expect to look them up. Don't try to memorize them all. Don't worry if you have to look them up. In fact, now with Google and so on, it's really easy. Or you can play with them online. You can say, let me just erase this, and I can say up here, hello world. There it is. It's black because HTML is making no assumption about what color the background is. We can pick a different background color so you can see it. Okay? And I can put a P around it. And now it's a paragraph. I can make it H1. And it's big. Okay? And we can try putting a div in here. I am a div. Notice how that happens. Notice here, for example, that we have a combination of the H2. This whole section here is called is the H2, and inside we have this piece of HTML, which is a text called goodbye, followed by 3 words, 4 words tagged by div. And as Narendra said, div means it's a block that sort of stands by itself on a new line, kind of like a paragraph would. And then the word class. If I change this to a span, I think of a span like a selection in a text editor. It's like it gives me a way to talk about a piece of text without any regard to how it's formatted. And that becomes interesting when you start putting CSS on it. To give you a little preview, I can over here say H2 color colon red, and the whole H2 becomes red. So this is a little CSS, and I'm going to get to this in a lot more detail, but basically I'm saying all tags that are H2 should be using color red. Okay? And so if I make this into span, it says all spans should be color red. If I say all spans within an H2 should be red, that's fine. If I put here span I am not red, why is that span not red? It's not inside of an H2. Everybody together says it, and it sounds like a bunch of mumbling. Okay, so you can use this to experiment, and you will. And there's 3 or 4 other sites like this, so this is not the only one. But it's a really handy way if you're not sure what's going on. I'm going to show you also a little bit later on how to use the browser for that too. Okay? Actually, yeah, there's a whole list of them I gave you here. Okay, so just if you want to find other ones, you don't like that one, you can find other ones. Now, like in XML, HTML tags often have attributes, and that's a very, very important thing. Attributes always look like this. You have the angle bracket tag, space, and then keyword equals quoted value. That's what they all look like. You can have multiple tags, rather attributes on a tag. For the purposes of HTML, this is an attribute does nothing. It's purely annotation for consumption by somebody else. So HTML by itself wouldn't do anything with this. But I'm doing here semantic tagging in a way because or semantic HTML because I'm not saying big and black, I'm saying chapter. And for the div, I'm saying subchapter in the supplement and not somewhere else. And in the paragraph, I'm saying this is an error, which may be colored red or something like that. So attributes are very common, and the most common attributes you will use are ID equals, class equals. But there's a few other very important ones. So as I said, they don't do anything in HTML by itself. They just create names, and they're used in other contexts. And you can combine them. Paragraph, ID equals error urgent, class equals so and more. Again, HTML doesn't care. All right, now we're going to talk about forms. It's a very important construct. The reason forms are very important, but other than we need them, is that they suddenly create a new situation in HTML. We just a minute ago talked about anchor tags, about links, A tags. Right, so if you click on it, as I said before, you click on the area that the tag belongs to. It means tells the browser do an HTTP get to this URL. Similarly, when I press the submit button on a form, I want the browser to do something specific. So that's the second example where the HTML is not just affecting the display; it's also affecting the behavior. Okay, and here's a very simple example. Is that a hand or just?
Yes.
Yes.
Why will you have two IDs? For
Very good
item?
question.
Semantically, doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense, correct. And it does not cause an error of any kind, but jumping a little bit ahead to the CSS conversation, because HTML doesn't care. Well, actually, let me take it back. Maybe I was jumping to a different question. What if you have the same attribute, like if you say class equals ABC and then class again equals CDE? Is that what you meant? Or you meant?
Right there, you had an example just now.
Where?
Can you scroll up? Where you said you had ID equals to error and something else? Yeah, error and agent.
Oh, like that. Okay, there's a lot of different ways to interpret. That's fine. This is this P has a tag of ID and also a tag of current. So it has a tag, an ID of error and an ID of urgent. Okay.
Yeah.
But there's two other ways in which I could have interpreted that. So just to show you, the other question is what happens if I say ID equals quote error and then ID equals quote urgent? I don't know the answer. Anybody know?
I think it's the same thing.
Same. And then the third question is.
No, it overrides the previous one.
Come on, arm wrestling.
I think you override the other ID.
She says otherwise.
I don't know for sure.
But everything he says sounds like he's sure.
Don't back down.
Everybody laughs. That's dangerous.
I don't think we will.
Yeah. But I don't know. Honestly, either one of you could be right. And then there's one more example in which ID, another tricky thing about ID is later on I will tell you that a class attribute on an item, from the point of view of CSS, is meant to denote a collection, a set of items that all have that class. So it could be important, or it could be sidebar, or whatever. And generally, the ID of a certain tag in CSS is meant to designate a unique, one-of-a-kind thing. So it might be ID equals, it could be just ID equals 712, because you want to remember that this particular row corresponds to record 712 in a database. So IDs, conceptually and the way they're explained, talk about a unique thing, and class talk about a collection of things. But there's no error checking like this. This is just a convention. In fact, you can misuse them. So again, this is just a matter of a coding convention for understandability. Okay, so there are three ways in that question could be interpreted. So let's go on. So here's what a form looks like. And by the way, I'm totally oversimplifying all these things because there's millions of other options. But basically, a form has a form tag, it has an action, which is a URL, and it has a method. And this line here says that whenever this form is submitted, the information gets sent with a post request to this URL. Now, what is the information, quote unquote? We look between the form and the end form, and you will find various tags that are important. This tag is just a formatting tag. That's just text. Formatting, text. That doesn't matter. Input is important. input is important, and input commit is important. So in this case, it's saying that the type, that this is creating a box. So input text area, as you can see here from type equals text. This ID is just a CSS ID. It's just for formatting. It doesn't mean anything except for formatting. The name is important. It's a string. It's a text string. It happens to be syntactically look like an array reference, but it's just a text string. Okay? Here we have another one, ID. You'll find here type equals password. Again, the input. This is just syntax. And here we have a name of this particular field. It's called the string sessions bracket close back password bracket. Okay, so what we have, and then we have finally the input name is commit. And the important thing is the type is submit. Okay, so we have inputs, we have types. Very important. The types can be text. They can be a bunch of other things. Drop downs, all the things you can have in a form appear here as options. And then tell the browser to create one of those UI widgets on the screen. Now, the browser will always look for a input type submit. That's the one that's going to appear as a button. When you press the button, what is the browser going to do? It's going to collect all the other things and create a little bundle of arguments. And the arguments are always text. So what is the browser sending to the server using an HTTP post to this URL is, in this case, 2 additional parameters. Parameter number 1 is called quote sessions bracket email close quote. Parameter number 2 is called sessions bracket password, and their values are whatever happen to have been in those boxes. So magic. That's how forms work. Okay? I took away a lot of noise that would confuse you. In fact, it could have taken away more noise. But basically, it's this form, end form, the action on here, what the method is, which almost always is post. Important to have a commit button, that's the submit button, and then one or more additional things which become part of the method. Yes?
Will the arguments or the parameters be added to the URL? Because in case of password, it would be.
That's a good question. I don't think they are. I think that that's more for input. So when I type the URL in with those, in other words, you're saying, will it say, I'll put that up there. Will it say /sessions password equals secret? No, I'm pretty sure it won't, but you may be able to force that if you want to. Now, if I type this into my browser and I do a get with this as the URL, then the browser will parse that, will send that as a get request in HTTP. But when it gets to you in your code, in the case of Rails, it will have parsed it and it still appears as your parameters. Okay? But this is kind of tricky because this name is created automatically by the Rails form helpers. Okay? And the reason it's structured this way is because it then makes the corresponding code on the controller side a little bit simpler. But it's purely convention. Okay? If you think about it, all that HTTP can do for the parameters is a list of key value pairs. Key value. Both are text. The key can be whatever, name. It could be something more complicated, session / name bracket today. And the value can be a date, 12/26, 89. These are both text strings. And so you'll have to remember that when you're on the other side to convert it into the right data type. Okay, pretty clear? Okay. Now there were questions posted about the form helpers and so on and so forth, and what's the difference between form for and form tag. I'm not going to get into it in detail other than tell you that both form for and form tag generate /form, but form for goes a little further and makes a lot of assumptions by analyzing the corresponding active record model to figure out and put in good defaults, like this business here. It's just Form 4 plugs nicely together with the standard writing of controllers and rails. But Form Tag is as often used when you don't want all this fancy stuff. But in the end, they're all creating this. In the end, any helper, like Form 4 Tag, for all those things, just create a little bit of HTML. That's all they do. Okay, that's all they do. And I'll show you in a subsequent point how you can actually experiment with us to see that. Okay, so that's HTML. Anybody have something that's a little bit confusing you want to quickly bring up? Okay, pretty. Yes.
I don't really know if you can scroll down, because I know this is just the HTML, but I don't know how to get, say, these values by ID in the controller.
That?
Yeah.
This does not get to the controller.
I know, but you have to use the percent equals, right?
Wait, if you want to specify an ID?
No. I guess
The
not.
angle bracket percent equals, that's in the view. And the effect of that is to create HTML. So it's still just in the view, never in the controller. Burke can answer your question.
About the ERB, like.
Right. Yeah. In fact, I'm going to show you ERB, and I'm going to put it up on the block in a second to show you exactly how it
Because
works.
you basically put this code in the view, but you just do the forms a little differently. That's
Does
how
it
I-
what? What does it refer to there?
HTML code?
State your question again, please.
Okay. So I make a web app in just HTML and CSS.
Right.
And I take the HTML body and put it
In the view. Yeah.
right? And then my understanding is I would have to take these form tags and change them to the percent equal form tags.
Not exactly. Okay. Yes and no.
Yeah, that's my question. Can I get the form tags without having to change it to?
Yeah, you can, but your life will not be as good. First of all, let me just break something down for you. Percent equals is nothing to do with forms. It has to do with views and HTML. The question is, what do you put in here? Okay, what you put in here is something like Form 4. Form 4 is a method, just a regular old Ruby method that generates a bunch of text. That bunch of text is going to be put in place of this whole construct. Okay? That's one thing I want to just clarify. The second thing is, can you just type this into the view? Yes, you can, because it's just HTML. However, you're going to have to type these things by hand every time, get them right, to make sure they match up with the controller. You're going to have to, if you change your routing table, for example, and you decide that a certain route is now nested within something else, you're going to have find all the places where you set /sessions and make it /login. Okay, so there's a lot of work to create for yourself. Probably they invented Rails going the other way. They were doing it all by hand, and they said every single time I change this route, I got to go through and change it to Scout. You better wait. Let's write a method, and they ended up where they are now. So yes, you can do it, but your life will not be as good. I saw some hands. I thought.
How do you do it with Rails? Like the same thing?
How do I do what?
The same thing with Rails?
This is I'm talking about Rails.
You have to
In other words, this business here,
Yeah.
percent equals percent. That's Rails.
Yeah.
This Form 4, that's Rails. Does that?
What was
You were
it?
confused by something though.
No, when you want to create the thing that, let's say that how would I start forming the example in Rails?
How would you do it fully? I'll leave that for another time, okay? Because that sort of takes me a little bit off the rails here, as it were. Anybody have another question? HTML and so on. That's confusing. I'm sure. Yes.
So we're gonna go to how to do the HTML stuff in Rails now, right?
Not right now. I'm going to go on a little bit, stay on the track with all the different languages. I'm not going to talk in detail.
But that's
about
where
that.
the money is at. That's what we need to know now, I think.
I'm sorry. This is what we're doing. Go ahead.
So I'm a little bit confused at how you would do something like making like a sidebar or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
So I understand that, sort of to make it prettier, that's
Yeah,
CSS.
yeah.
But to me that seems like a very different, it's not really a table. It's not an image. It's not a
Right.
paragraph.
You would use Bootstrap. Have you done Bootstrap yet?
a little bit, yeah.
Okay, so you would use Bootstrap, and I won't get into that right now either. But Bootstrap makes it really easy to make a sidebar. You basically can say, you can just say, you know, I want this one to be, you know, this wide, and then I want the rest to be this wide. In fact, the website for this course is all Bootstrap. It's very, very easy. Okay? All right. Let's talk about CSS. The good stuff in CSS. So CSS is another language. It has a different syntax, and you have to know it. And it has correct and incorrect programs. CSS by itself does nothing. It only does something when it's associated with something like HTML. Generally, that's the only thing I've ever seen CSS connected with. And CSS takes the HTML, which is just the structure of what you want rendered, and allows you to do all kinds of styling, color, backgrounds, spacing, typography, all that stuff. Lets you apply that to an HTML page. Generally, an HTML, this is not always true. In simpler cases, you can remove the CSS from a page and it'll still work, it just will look ugly. But in more advanced cases, the page will break totally. Style is in the way of things look like, just said this. So the first thing you have to do is to tell a certain HTML file that a certain CSS file belongs with it. And there's many ways of doing this. The best and the most common way of doing it is just to put a line of HTML in the head section of your page that says, hey, go to this place to get the CSS file. But somehow the HTML file has to say, this is my CSS file. Okay? That's the first thing you have to do. Notice you can have multiple of these. So you can have a CSS file A and a CSS file B and a CSS file C, which people do sometimes for structuring the code and make it more legible. But basically they create a big honking set of CSS declarations. There's other things you can do, and I don't recommend them, although when you get a little bit more advanced, you'll do them for good reason. But you can actually have CSS statements directly inside the head section, so not have a second file. You can even have CSS statements attached directly to an HTML tag like this. P style equals font size 200%. Okay, this is just CSS, but it's right in the HTML. Also not recommended, but a technique for debugging and so on. It's useful. I'll show you that. So CSS's sole purpose in life is to add styling, color, and so on. Sometimes it looks like it's doing a lot more than just that. Sometimes CSS looks like it's adding functionality. So those of you who know CSS, do you have some examples where you say it's not really true that its sole purpose is to add styling? Yes?
I don't really think of one right now, but I think there are a couple others.
Yeah.
I'd say the one active attribute you can have in CSS is a hover attribute.
Yep.
So you can hover over something and make it actually change.
Yep. Yep.
And the kind of little animated things like that CSS can do.
Yep. Anybody else? Anybody else? Well, one thing you do in CSS is hide and show things. So you can make things appear and disappear with the CSS changing. So if a page looks like you had a page and then within HTML suddenly there's a pop-up overlaying it, like a dialog box, what's happening is that the dialog box was there all along, but the property was in CSS was to hide it. It's like display : hidden, I think is what it says. So it's invisible. When it needs to come up, some other process, JavaScript process, makes it display visible, and suddenly it pops up. So a page like that, if you ripped out the CSS, it would look like gibberish. So that's a big exemplar of things that allow you to build very fancy, sophisticated looking UI interactions by messing around with CSS. But by and large, it's just display. Yes, George?
So from this pop-up box example,
Yeah.
I conclude that you can have multiple layers on an HTML file.
You can, yes.
Can you define them in HTML or in CSS?
Well, this example is not one of multiple layers. This example is literally, if you looked at the HTML for that example, it would, you know, if you from a distance, you have this section here, this section of code, describing the page, and this other section of code below it describing the pop-up. And this section would have a visible false, and this section would have a visible true, and then some JavaScript would toggle that, or would just make this visible. And then the positioning would be that it would be one on top of the other. So you could basically say this guy, for example, has to float to the top, and this guy also has to float to the top. But because they're not visible at the same time, you don't have a collision. And again, I'm waving my hand a lot. I'm just trying to give you the sort of the hooks on which you can go do some research.
Floating thing is defined in HTML or in CSS?
CSS. Yes.
Since you like essentially downloaded a copy of the website, you know, the CSS and everything,
Yeah.
could you theoretically just change those values and like, you know, put in bad data, you know,
Wait, good.
like in the sense that like if something came up and that's not what you're supposed to see, but let's say
Mhm.
there's like a hidden, you know, option that allows you to bypass everything and takes you to a different page or something. You know?
So you're talking about a security problem?
Yeah, just like
Well, remember
for
that.
validations, I guess like if you put like database validations, it would,
Yeah.
it would not like go past it.
Right.
But like you're still given the ability to change so many different things. Right?
Yeah, you can change things, but remember there's the client and the server has to be written in a way that no matter what crazy stuff is on the client, the server protects against security problems. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, there was an easy case with this, I think like 1 or 2 years ago, where
Yeah.
On the Apple side,
Yeah.
you were able to, just as you said, change, download the code and change one model model name
Yeah.
from the iPhone to say the MacBook,
Yeah.
and then it would skip the whole contract
Uh-huh.
thing. And
Yeah.
so people were able to get the iPhones for the contract price, like $600 less,
Yeah.
without actually doing the contract.
Yeah.
Because for MacBooks you would not do the contract, and so it was
Right.
syncing into MacBook, and then the last page before clicking on purchase,
Yeah.
you would change it back to the iPhone,
Yeah.
and it worked.
Yeah, so that's the security hole. But again, the
Yeah.
server should have, the server in the end, you cannot, at least through this technique, be hacked. So the server should make sure that it verifies everything's legal. Yeah.
I was going to add something to what George was saying about layering in CSS. You can do what's called z-indexing. And with a z-index, you do specify the order of things on a page, like layering. So CSS does layer things, and you can absolutely have a pop-up that is overlaying everything because you just give it a better z-index that prioritizes it, but hide it until you want it to come up. And you could also not even hide it and just change the z-index so that it moves behind everything else.
Which I've never used, but that sounds right. Yeah. All this stuff. I mean, the danger is that it gets overwhelming. All these CSS, HTML, all of them have so many different. They're so powerful that there's big fat books written about them and courses that go for weeks teaching you. And yes, if you want to make a super beautiful website like Gmail, like it's not so beautiful maybe, but it's a tour de force of HTML and JavaScript and CSS. You know, that's very advanced. That stuff that the person that did the HTML and CSS for those kinds of sites have been doing it for years, and that's all they do. They probably don't write a line of Ruby. So it's very specialized. But for day-to-day engineering, you know, don't be overwhelmed and sort of discover things that you need. And then, by the way, you know, cut and paste, beg, borrow, steal, find a site that looks the way you want it and see what they did. Okay. So in general, here, what's that?
I said we're pretty good.
Yeah, but that's it. You know, you have to. So in general, CSS looks like this. Okay, so it's one or more keywords here, pair of curly brackets, and a set of attribute value pairs. Notice, actually, notice they're ended with a semicolon, but there's no semicolon here. Okay, easy mistake to fall into. Notice it's a colon, not an equal sign. Again, easy. One of the things with these languages is often they don't give you error messages. They'll just not do anything. So that's the basic format. And I'll break it up. This thing before the curly bracket is called a selector, and it designates what part of the related HTML page is going to be affected by this clause. So the way this is written, all P tags have these attributes. Color is red and text alignment is center. Every single one on the whole page, not on the whole site, because why does this not necessarily affect the whole site? Yes?
It's inside of a paragraph.
Yeah, but why does this not make that every paragraph on the whole website turns red? Yeah,
Well, doesn't each HTML page choose which CSS?
exactly. It's one page at a time. You may use the same CSS on another page, but by itself, it's one page at a time. Exactly right. So that's the selector. This enumerates the styles. There's a parse the property and the value. There are huge numbers of properties and values. I put a link in there for you. This is one of many. I find this one pretty good, the W3 schools. So let's talk about selectors. That's pretty important. We could write a whole course just on them. But basically, there's 3 building blocks to a selector. Remember, the selector is the thing before the curly bracket. 3 building blocks to the selector. One building block is a tag. Could be dog, could be P, could be H1, whatever. The second building block is a class, as in HTML, as in the, now I'm back in HTML, class equals important, ID equals 41-S, close, okay? HTML, tag, attributes and values, special attribute called class, another special attribute called ID, present to tie it into the CSS. So the tag itself, the class, which is decorated with a period, so for example, dot chapter, and the ID, which is decorated with a pound sign, for example, excuse me, pound arrow. The important selectors are just tag, class, and ID. The challenge is in how they're combined. Okay? And again, this is a whole study. I'm going to give you the tip of the iceberg. I'll give you some examples. So, element by itself, UL, font size, 12 pixels, means that every unordered list on this page is going to be 12 pixels. Okay? Class. Dot front page, curly bracket, font size is 125%. Means that every tag on this page that says class equals front page is going to be 125% of the default size. Next one, ID. You're going to write it like this: pound remark, font style is italic. Any tag anywhere that has ID equals remark is going to be italic. ID equals remark. Could be anything. Now, here's where it gets interesting. There's a lot of different ways of combining them, and there's many more. If you write UL, well, who can tell me what this does? Somebody who hasn't said, how about you? Can you read this from there?
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you think this does? UL pound remark dot front page display none.
It's going to take any UL that is also of ID remark and class front page and will not display it.
Yeah, make it invisible. Yep, exactly. Yes.
I have a question because ID should be unique in the whole HTML file. So what's the meaning of UL and hashtag ID? It's unique, right?
Yeah, because you can have a lot of different ULs, and you want to say I want this one, not the other ones.
The problem is the ID should be unique in the whole.
Oh, so you can do ID by itself. is what
Yeah,
you're
so
saying.
you don't need
You
to
can use it in
use
multiple
UL.
Well, remark might not just have UL in it. It might have something else in it.
Right, that's another one. Yeah, it could be that's probably the best answer.
Remark
Which is,
name one.
I could have hashtag remark being blinking red, but UL hashtag remark being blinking green.
But then you would have two different things with remark. That's
No,
what I mean.
remark would be like the tag for the div that contains all of these things.
Oh.
Anyway,
The tag
but
of
I mean,
the-
but basically you're
the-
on to the truth, I think. The truth is it's not heavily syntax checked. It is a convention, and people break the convention all the time. So just the mental model, because there's things that are kind of in between too. Is this an ID, is this a class? I wouldn't waste too much time worrying about it. Generally, try to use a class unless you decide this is a one-of-a-kind element. I probably should use an ID, but it's really not super rigorous. Okay? That's my working theory. Okay, let's take the next one. Dot front page, dot headline, background light blue. Who wants to say what that does? Yes.
It goes to the headline object on the front page and makes it blue. Makes the background blue.
Yes, but be more precise about the head. What does that mean? The headline thing.
It should be defined on the front page. So
Okay, who can be more precise about it? Yes, Miranda.
It'll have two classes, front page and headline.
Right. So one thing that has class equals front page space headline. Okay, and that'll make it light blue.
And it doesn't have to. I mean, if you write an HTML that takes in the CSS that has front page, it doesn't have to have headline also, right?
It wouldn't match this if it didn't have both.
Right.
Yeah.
So it doesn't change the background to blue there.
No, right. It's got to be literally one thing that has both the class equals headline and front page. Kind of conceptually, front page of the headline of the front page is light blue. Everything else, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said if you use both classes for the same element.
Yeah.
Would it also work if you have like a div with a class front page and inside of it something with a class headline?
Use a space. So this dot front page space P means I have a tag. It's now nesting.
So if you nest a class in a class, then you would make a space?
Yeah, exactly. So in other words, I could say P class equals 1, and in here I have Li class equals 2. Okay, blah, blah, blah. I would match that with dot 1 space dot 2. And there's a difference between this and UL. If I wanted the class 2 to be only if it's here, but not here, you can actually put I think it's an angle bracket this way, which means dot 1 immediately enclosing dot 2. And it goes on and on and on. Yes?
Does ordering matter?
Does what?
Ordering.
Yeah. In the case with a comma, it doesn't, but in this case, it does very much.
Oh, no. In the case of the front page and headline.
No.
Here?
Yeah.
No. Finally, this case is with a comma. This is as if I had 3 separate lines, one called H1, color red, H2, color red, H3, color red. So that's the most vanilla. Yeah.
And what with the descendants? The order should matter there, right?
Pardon me, what?
With the descendants like that, the 1.1.2, the order should matters there, right?
The what matters here?
Order.
Oh yes, of course. Because you would write it like this. You would write it dot 1, dot 2.
No, we don't need the arrow, but
You don't
with
need
the
it.
dots, yeah.
If you want to insist that 2 is immediately under 1, then you use the arrow. If you don't care where it is, as long as it's somewhere under 1, you don't use the arrow. Okay? Again, this is just to give you some landmarks to understand what's going on. And it'll get you, these rules will get you a long, long way. But there are definitely additional rules that you can do more complicated things. Okay? Oh, yes. I want to really quickly mention the box model. Yeah, I'm gonna continue next lecture because there's a few more things I want to touch on. I can already see. But basically, you will see a series of CSS properties, I guess they're called, yes, like margin, dash, top, or padding, dash, right, and interpreting that stuff is referred to as understanding the box model. And the box model is if you have a thing, and the thing can be an image, it could be a paragraph, it could be anything. In HTML on the screen, they're always going to be displayed in a rectangle. And that rectangle can have a variety of spacers around it. In every rectangle, that's the content itself, so this could be ABCD, it could be an image, whatever. There's one zone of spacing they call the padding. Then there's an area for a box around it, like a border, like a line or a dotted line. That's called the border. So when you say border thickness, you're talking about this green stuff. And then you have another amount of white around that, which is called the margin. Now, if your item does not have a border, like it's just a bunch of text, then the distinction between padding and margin is not very clear, because they both mean that they keep away anything else out of those zones. But whenever you're trying to move spacing around, like the change I made to the website over the weekend, in fact, I'm going to quickly give you a fun demo. See, I put these lines in. So this is interesting, because what I did was I gave this header a few properties, and here's a thing you can do for debugging. You go to your web, whatever they call it, and each browser calls it something else, but this little debugging area, and you can. I can't make this text bigger. Sorry. I can hit inspect and hover it over the thing I care about, this thing, and you will see here three things. I see here the margin, the green is the padding, and the blue is the content. I see here that I have an H4 tag with an ID, Peter's rule of thumb for good user experience. So I made the whole text be the ID. And furthermore, if I now dig in, if I click on this, I'll find myself down here. You see this line here? And if I look on the right, I will see, if I click on the metrics, I will see that that particular thing has a content of 8, and it gets highlighted. So the content is 847 wide and 19 tall. There's a padding of 5 pixels. Then there's a border of 1 pixel, that's the line. By the way, border is 1 on the top and 0, 0, 0 on left, right, and bottom. Hence, the line is like that. And in fact, if I highlight it here, you can see it green, okay? And in fact, if I now put a 1 here, if I make if I put a 1 here, if I say I want a border width at the bottom of 4, I get, it didn't take it. Why didn't it take it?
Can you press enter, please?
It's not taking it for some reason. There. And now I have to change the border color also, because I have the border color set. But basically now it's got space here. So now the 2 green things are the 2 borders, the 2 paddings rather. And it lost the border again. I don't know. For some reason it's not letting me do it. But anyway, the point is, understanding the box model is critical. And if I go back to the rules here, I'm looking at the same thing.
Yes, on the padding, not on the border.
So I have border bottom width is 4 pixels, padding bottom is 4, but I don't have the color for the border set. So I can just try to see if I can do it here. Can I add it here? Let's see. Just enter. Yes. Well, I don't know if this is going to work. Border dash color green and border bottom width. I don't know why exactly it's not doing it, but pardon?
Go back to the box model. Put 4 in padding on border.
Oh. It's not, it's rejecting it. I don't know why. Now it took it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, you can see this, the HTML on this side. You can see the CSS on this side. You can actually change it to experiment with things.
What does it mean when it's crossed out?
That means that it's been overridden by something higher up. Okay, so for example here, I can't say exactly, but generally that's what it means. So if you go to the bottom, you see your font family is that. Well, that's what the body style says, but this thing says font family. Well, one of the H's says font family is something else.
So it's actually the lower down.
Here, telex.
The lower down CSS overwrites the higher CSS. So like an H4 CSS will overwrite a bottom CSS.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I'm sure you're right, but anyway, the main thing I want to show you, because we're totally out of time, is the idea that you have the box model, which is really important, and understanding it is going to take a few tries before you get it, but you can use the CSS inspector in your browser to fool around with it and play with it until you understand what's going on. In general, in all these cases when the CSS is not doing what you want or the HTML is not doing what you want, reduce it to a small case. Because if you're in the middle of a big Rails app, life can be very confusing. If you can extract the HTML and demonstrate that it does or does not work in isolation, you can then figure out why, what might be going on. Yeah.
And when you just say like top or bottom, because to certain pixels, what was that in the bottom?
You have to look. They all have very, very annoying defaulting schemes. I don't know. I don't even know if you can say just top. Can you just say top?
Yeah.
Well, I'd have to see the example. But you have to just look at this defaulting all over the place. Sometimes it's top followed by multiple arguments. The first one is the thickness, the second one is the dot, the third one is the color. There's many different shortcuts. Okay? All right. Let me just check here to see whether I covered what I wanted to. Experiment, there it is, boom, the web inspector. Okay, we're good. See you. So Thursday is lab. All the time is going to be spent working with your teams. It's written up on the page as to what preparation you have to do. That's it.
And that's so like have you seen the course creation form? It's not. I mean, it doesn't have. It only has one field right now, but I think I have a model form you can actually